Stop what you are doing. Something shifted in them today, something they can no longer hold inside. And whether you feel it already or not, a part of you already knows exactly what this is about. This is not a small thing. What happened inside them recently has broken something open, permanently. And what comes out of that breaking is a message they have been carrying for longer than either of you have words for. Stay here, because what I am about to tell you will explain everything that has felt unresolved. Have you ever sat in a quiet moment and felt something pull at you from a direction you could not name? Not anxiety, not memory exactly, but something older than both. A knowing, a pressure in the chest that belongs to a connection that was never fully closed. That feeling has a source, and the person it belongs to has just reached a point where staying silent has become more painful than speaking the truth. Something happened inside them. Not an event the outside world could see or measure, but an internal collapse of everything they built to keep themselves protected from how deeply they actually feel for you. Long before your soulmate picks up a phone, composes a message, or finds the courage to stand in front of you and speak, something has already been transmitted. The psyche, that vast and largely invisible interior world that operates beneath conscious thought, does not wait for permission to communicate. It moves through channels that the rational mind neither controls nor fully understands. It speaks in the language of sudden restlessness without a visible cause. It speaks in dreams where a specific face returns with a weight and a clarity that ordinary dreams never carry. It speaks in that particular feeling that arrives in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. A pressure in the chest, a stillness that does not belong to the moment, a knowing that something, somewhere, has shifted without any external evidence to confirm it. Most people dismiss these signals. They label them as overthinking, as longing, as the mind playing its familiar tricks. But what they are actually experiencing is real communication traveling through the only channel that was available before words became possible. The soul-level connection between two people does not require physical proximity to remain active. It does not require daily conversation to stay alive. It operates continuously beneath the surface of ordinary life, registering shifts, registering readiness, registering the moment when something inside the other person finally breaks open and begins moving toward truth. When your soulmate reaches a turning point internally, you often feel it before they say a word. That unexplained pull you feel towards someone you have not spoken to in weeks is not imagination. That sense that something is about to change is not wishful thinking. It is the psyche doing what it has always done, receiving what is being quietly sent, carrying the message your conscious mind has not yet been given the language to fully translate. The world conditions people to look outward for significance. They wait for the dramatic gesture, the visible change, the moment that can be pointed to and named clearly. But the most consequential things that ever happen between two people who are genuinely connected never begin in the outer world. They begin in a place no one else can see, in the interior landscape of a single human being, sitting alone with a truth they can no longer comfortably avoid. When something big happens between soulmates, it rarely arrives as an event. It arrives as a collapse. A quiet but total failure of every internal arrangement a person built to keep themselves insulated from the full weight of what they feel. The story they told themselves about having moved on stops holding together. The distance they maintained stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like punishment. The life they constructed around the absence of this connection suddenly becomes impossible to inhabit without noticing exactly what is missing from its center. That is the big thing. Not a conversation, not a decision made over coffee, but a moment inside the self where the architecture of avoidance simply gives way, and everything that was being held back by that architecture floods forward with a clarity that cannot be argued with or reorganized back into something manageable. This internal event always precedes the outward one. The message comes after the shift, never before it. The reaching out happens because something inside already surrendered to the truth, not because a person simply decided one morning to feel differently. You cannot think your way into this kind of readiness. It arrives when the interior world has been quietly dismantled by the accumulated weight of everything that was never genuinely resolved. And what remains after that dismantling is the only thing that was ever actually real. There is a specific quality to the urgency that arrives when someone who once retreated finally decides to speak. It does not feel like panic. It does not feel like impulse. It feels like inevitability. Like something that has been building pressure beneath the surface for a long time, has finally reached the point where containment is no longer possible and release is no longer a choice but a necessity. Most people misread this urgency when they encounter it. They assume it means instability. They assume the person reaching out is acting from emotion rather than from genuine transformation. But urgency of this particular kind is not the opposite of readiness. It is readiness finally making itself loud enough to override every hesitation, every protective instinct, every carefully constructed reason that was previously used to justify staying silent and staying distant. The retreating that happened before was not random. It was the behavior of someone whose interior world had not yet grown large enough to hold what they genuinely felt without being overwhelmed by it. Every person has a threshold between what they can feel and what they can act upon without losing their sense of themselves in the process. When the feeling exceeds the threshold, the automatic response is withdrawal, not because the feeling is unwanted, but because the self does not yet have the capacity to contain it without fracturing something essential. What changes that capacity is time, honesty, and the slow interior work of confronting everything that was previously avoided. And when that work reaches a certain point of completion, when enough of the old fear has been examined and enough of the old avoidance has been seen clearly for what it was, the threshold shifts. What was once overwhelming becomes something the person can finally stand inside without retreating. And the urgency you feel from them now is simply that shift announcing itself. The moment readiness stopped being a quiet internal state and became something that absolutely had to be expressed outward before another day passed without the truth being spoken. There is a particular cruelty in the silence that falls between two people who were never truly finished with each other. It looks identical to indifference from the outside. It carries all the external markers of someone who has moved on, who has closed a chapter, who has reorganized their life around a different center. But silence and absence are not the same thing, and confusing the two is one of the most painful and most common mistakes a person can make when trying to understand what a real connection actually is. Silence is a surface condition. It describes what is happening in the visible, speakable layer of a relationship. Absence is something far deeper. It describes whether a person has actually departed from the interior world of someone who genuinely felt them. And the truth that most people never get told clearly enough is that you can be completely silent in someone's life while remaining entirely present in the part of them that was never governed by choice or decision or conscious intention. The connection that went quiet was not dead. It was doing something that living things do when the conditions for open expression are not yet available. It was continuing beneath the surface, intact, patient, and entirely indifferent to the story being told above it about closure and moving forward and time healing everything that was left unresolved. Real connection does not require maintenance to survive. It does not need regular contact to remain embedded in the deeper layers of a person's interior life. It simply persists, the way certain things persist, not because they are being actively preserved, but because they were genuine enough in their original formation that nothing ordinary has the power to dissolve them. The silence you experienced was never the truth of what existed between you. It was only the sound of someone who had not yet found their way back to what they never actually left. If you feel in your body that this message belongs to you, if something in these words is landing somewhere specific and real, stay with this until the end. Because what follows is going to explain not only what happened to them, but why it happened now, and what it means for where you are both about to stand. There is something deeply disorienting about discovering that the force, which once pushed someone away from you, and the force now pulling them irresistibly back toward you, are not opposites. They are the same energy, moving through the same interior landscape, wearing different faces depending on which stage of readiness the person carrying them has reached. Fear and love, in the context of a genuine soul-level connection, are not enemies occupying opposite ends of a spectrum. They are companions, born from the same source, which is the overwhelming significance of what is actually felt. When someone retreats from a connection that is real, the retreat is not evidence of insufficient feeling. It is evidence of too much. The fear that drives a person away from something genuine is only ever proportional to the depth of what they stand to lose by fully entering it. Small feelings produce no fear worth mentioning. Surface connections can be approached and exited without the nervous system registering anything particularly threatening. But when something real arrives, when the feeling reaches into territory the person has never safely inhabited before, the fear that rises is enormous precisely because the love beneath it is enormous. This is the part that changes. Not the love, which was always present and always substantial, but the relationship the person has with their own fear. Through time, through honesty, through the slow and often painful process of sitting with what they once ran from, they develop something they did not previously possess. The capacity to feel the fear fully without allowing it to make their decisions for them. The ability to recognize the old protective instinct firing without automatically obeying it. What you are receiving from them now is love that has finally outlasted the fear that once spoke louder. The courage did not replace what was difficult. It simply grew patient and strong enough to breathe through it and step forward anyway. There is something that genuine connection does to a person that no conscious decision has the power to undo. It embeds itself, not in the memory, which can be managed and redirected and gradually filled with other things, but in the deeper layers of the interior world where choice does not reach and where the ordinary tools of moving on have no real authority. When two people have touched something real together, something that reached below the surface level of comfort and familiarity into the actual depth of who they each are, that contact leaves a mark that does not respond to the decision to walk away. Most people believe that leaving is a complete action, that once a person removes themselves from a connection physically, once they stop reaching out and stop responding and arrange their days around a different center, the interior separation follows naturally and eventually becomes total. But this is not what actually happens when the connection was genuine. The physical departure occurs, the silence becomes real. The outward life reorganizes itself convincingly around the absence. And yet something remains that was never consulted about the decision to leave and never agreed to honor it. That something is not sentiment. It is not simple longing or the romanticizing of what was lost. It is the unresolved presence of a connection that was real enough to become part of the person's interior architecture, woven into the structure of how they understand themselves, how they measure depth, how they recognize what is missing when everything around them is technically sufficient but somehow fundamentally incomplete. You remained in them, not because they chose to keep you there, but because real things do not vacate simply because they become inconvenient. The unconscious does not negotiate with fear or comfort or the desire for a simpler life. It holds what was true, quietly and indefinitely, until the person it belongs to is finally ready to stop pretending otherwise. There is a particular misunderstanding that surrounds moments of return in deep connections. The person waiting tends to frame what is coming as a restoration, a return to what existed before, a recovery of something that was lost and is now being found again and placed back where it originally stood. But this framing, as understandable as it is, misses the most important truth about what is actually about to happen between you. This is not a return to what was. What was no longer exists in the form it once held. Both of you have been changed by everything that passed through the silence, and what is coming is not a reunion with the past, but an initiation into something neither of you has inhabited before. What they need to say carries weight that ordinary conversation does not carry. It has been formed in the interior space, where the most honest and most difficult work happens, shaped by everything they confronted alone, everything they could not avoid, everything that slowly dismantled the version of themselves that once chose distance over depth. Words that come from that place do not simply convey information. They reorganize things. They shift the ground beneath both people simultaneously, because truth spoken at that level of honesty does not leave the listener unchanged any more than it left the speaker unchanged in the forming of it. You will not receive this message and remain exactly who you were before it arrived. Something in your own interior world will respond to it in ways you cannot fully anticipate or prepare for. Old understandings will adjust. Old wounds will be seen differently. Old certainties about what happened and what it meant will soften into something more complete and more honest than the story either of you has been carrying alone through all the silence. What is coming is not a conclusion. It is a beginning that could only be reached by two people who each did what was necessary to deserve it. There is something that most people never consider when they are trying to understand why someone who left is now returning with urgency and truth, and a message they can no longer contain. They assume the return was caused by something the person who left finally figured out about themselves, alone, in isolation, through their own interior journey, without reference to anything outside that process. And while the interior work was genuinely theirs to do, and genuinely necessary, something made that work feel urgent in a way it would not have felt had you collapsed, chased, or made yourself smaller in the aftermath of their absence. That something was your stillness, not indifference, not performance, not a strategy deployed consciously to produce a particular outcome, but the authentic and deeply earned quality of a person who chose to remain whole when everything in the situation invited them to fracture, who continued becoming more fully themselves when the easiest available response would have been to organize their entire interior life around the absence of someone else, who refused, perhaps without even fully realizing they were refusing, to allow another person's unreadiness to define the boundaries of their own growth. This quality is not invisible to the person who left. Even across silence, even across distance, even through all the arrangements they made to move forward without looking back honestly, your wholeness registered. It registered as something their constructed life consistently failed to replicate. It registered as the standard against which everything they chose instead, quietly and persistently, fell short. You did not draw them back by needing them. You drew them back by not needing them to be complete, by demonstrating through the simple and powerful act of continuing to live honestly and fully that what existed between you was never the ceiling of what you were capable of, only the beginning of it. Everything that has been spoken here points toward a single truth that was present from the very beginning, before the silence, before the distance, before the fear made its choices and the absence settled into something that looked permanent from the outside. The truth is this: what was real between you was never the kind of thing that time or distance or another person's unreadiness could actually finish. It only ever went underground. It only ever waited in the interior spaces where genuine things wait when the surface conditions are not yet ready to hold them honestly. Your soulmate did not return because circumstances became convenient. They did not reach this moment of urgency because life handed them an easy path back to what they once walked away from. They arrived here because something inside them finally completed enough of the necessary work to make honesty more bearable than avoidance. Because the weight of what was left unspoken grew heavier than the fear of speaking it. Because every carefully constructed reason to stay silent eventually collapsed under the accumulated pressure of everything that was never genuinely resolved between you. And you arrived here because you did not allow their unreadiness to become your definition. You remained. Not desperately, not performatively, but in the quiet and unshakable way that only someone who understands their own worth is capable of remaining. You continued becoming. You continued growing into a wholeness that asked nothing of them and owed nothing to their timeline. What stands between you now is not the past with all its hesitation and fear and missed chances. What stands between you now is two people who have each been changed by everything the silence required of them, arriving at the same threshold from different directions, carrying different lessons, but reaching finally for the same truth. Some connections do not end. They simply wait until both people are ready to begin.